Apologies, it is because of me where everything's been turned around because I have to go back to the office because I've been in edit all day, so I've got to go back there and do the 10:30 news. Anyway, I'd be really interested to know who it is that I'm talking to. So presumably all you guys are already graduates, correct? No? So some of you are students? Yeah, so a mixture? A mixture. Okay, so how many of you are students? Yeah, and how many of you are already in the working world? Oh, quite a few, that's good. Those students, you're excited but nervous about going to the working world? Well, you should be, because you're working to about 70 if the government has their way. Right, so thank you for the lovely introduction from Claudine. Claudine wanted me to come up here and just talk about how I got to where I've gotten to so far. But I wanted to pick up on something that James said that the company is very open to diversity, which is something that we also are at ITN. But I always sort of, especially when it comes to women, I'm very big on diversity when it comes to both women and also ethnicity, because clearly I'm like one big thing of that, so gold star to ITN. Because essentially, especially when we're talking about women, we are talking about 51% of the population. So it's not really being open to diversity the way that I look at it. It's basically reflecting the streets in which you walk in every day. And that's not being open to it. It's good for business, but it's also essential, because it's essential that we all have exactly the same rights and the opportunities, irrespective if you're a black male to a black woman, to a white male to a black woman, to whatever, that we all have an equal amount of opportunity. And that's where I sit, and that's what I've always fought for ever since I graduated from university. I've mentored since I was 21, from when I graduated, and I've continued to do that ever since. I've worked with various different organisations, pupil referral units, I've worked in prisons, I've worked in schools, I've worked in universities, I've worked all over, because I know that I'm very lucky to have been raised the way that I was raised, in the family that I was raised in, and to go to the school that I went to. My parents worked 5 or 6 jobs between them during the whole course of my school life in order to be able to send me to a private school. I was the only black girl in my private school in the whole of my primary school. The secondary school was a lot more mixed. But I saw my dad get up at 5:30 every morning, and he didn't come back home from work until 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. My mum was working and she was studying and she had another job as well, because they felt that they were immigrants that came here and they wanted their kids to have a better start in life than perhaps they did. So they worked very hard to get that. So as a result, me, my brother and my sister have this drive that comes from seeing your parents work incredibly hard and wanting you to make your mark in the world. So my dad was, yes, very impressed when I then became the first black woman to present news at 10, but it hasn't been an easy journey by any stretch of the imagination. I've been doing this for 16, 17 years now. I know I don't look it, but I really have been. And I first did my work placement when I was 16 years old, and that was at the Guardian newspaper. And I'd sent out 50 letters, because email wasn't a thing then, sent out 50 letters to various organisations for where I wanted to do work placement. And I actually wanted Sugar magazine, because that was super cool, because they did fashion and celebs. And I was like, yes, that's the one I want. And it was the Guardian newspaper that came back to me, and I was really upset, because as far as I'm concerned, that was really boring. But it was the most amazing experience that I had, and I was there for an entire summer. And I wanted to become a journalist because I wanted to tell people stories. I have a passion for it. I love talking to people. I love interviewing people. I love learning about people. And my dad taught me to read by reading their headlines at the front of the Guardian newspaper. So yes, it was very fortuitous that that ended up being the place where I first did my work experience. But it's not been easy thus far. I've worked all over. I've worked in New York. I worked at New York Post as a features writer. I did that during the 3rd year of university. I went over there for a summer. It was pre-9/11. And you'll understand why I've said that, because one of the double pay spreads I had was because the latest series of Sex and the City had started, and Samantha had jumped on the back of a fire truck in order to be able to pick up a fireman. So I was sent onto the streets of Manhattan to figure out how to pick up a fireman in Manhattan, and I had to travel around all the firehouses and then had a double paid spread. So that was super cool, but that was a lot about mentors. A lot of the opportunities I've had is by pinpointing important people and organisations, or at that stage at university, that I knew could end up having some use to me later on in life. So when I started at uni, I had obviously my course leader, the director of the course, I did journalism, and other lecturers that were around. I realised that most of the lecturers hadn't actually worked in the industry for about 10, 15 years. So their contacts wouldn't be so great. But there was one guy, Anthony Delano, who was still writing, who was still writing books and articles and, traveling the world. And I wanted him be my mentor and I wanted him to be my friend. So I would often just turn up at his door and we'd sit and have a chat over a cup of tea because I knew at some point he would become very useful, but also his knowledge was incredible. So I then, when I needed to get a placement outside of the UK, because I already had lots of placements here, I said, do you know anyone that I can talk to? One of his friends worked at Fox News, worked at News International, News Corps and Avenue of the Americas in Manhattan. And he said, yes, and I will gladly give her your contact number. So we were chatting, and a week later, I was on a flight to New York and stayed there for 3.5 months writing for the New York Post. When I talk about mentors, I still have one because I cannot tell you or underestimate just how important it is. I've been doing this for a long time. I don't know everything. The guys who have already started working in the working world, you may be the most amazing person in the entire world in your job as you believe it, but you don't know everything. And it's fundamental and hugely important. When I was working at the BBC, I was there for 6 years. I was working across 6 different networks at the BBC. So I was at 1Extra as a presenter. I was at Radio 1 as a presenter and also as a reporter. I had my own show on BBC Radio London. I was doing a show on BBC Radio 5 Live. I was also doing the news channel and I was presenting bulletins for BBC 3 60-second news. Because I chose someone within the BBC at 1Extra who said to me, what you have to do, because there aren't many people like me who are working at the BBC, he said, you basically got to spread yourself as wide as possible and something will stick. So that's what I did. I did 7-day weeks, double and triple shifts, while still raving, because I was clearly a lot younger then, so I could do that. And absolutely loved it. I was tired a lot, but I knew that that's what I had to do. So when I then moved to the back of Beyond, which was lovely, I moved to Norwich for a year to concentrate on just doing telly full time. Then ITV came calling and suggested that the job to do the overnight programmes. For 4.5 years, I worked overnights at ITV. Only those of you, and you're probably too young actually to have even been up at 5:30 in the morning. You've been getting in at 5:30 in the morning. For 4.5 years, I did the bulletin at 5:30. But my shift was from 8 o'clock at night till 9:30 in the morning. And I did 7 nights on, 7 nights off. So I did 84 hours in a week, and then we'd have the following week off. But anyone who's travelled anywhere internationally for work, James, you may well have done, you'll know that essentially it feels like jet lag. So I was jet lagged for 4.5 years. But I had a mentor that by that point was at BBC 3 and the editor of BBC 3 60-second news. And he said, stick with it. I know you're tired. I know you feel as though the world is ending. I know it's taking a massive toll on you, but just stick with it. I promise you it will all work out. And he was right. I still have a mentor at ITV. I took on who's the managing editor, Robin Elias. And anytime I've got to make any kind of decisions work-wise, I'll always be sat in a sofa and going, Robin, I just don't know what to do. And he'll talk me through it. Because I don't think I'm too big to ever ask for advice. And I think that's the only way that you can really get ahead in life is to have that ability to be able to ask for help when needed. If you can't do that, the likelihood is you'd only get to hear rather than being able to get to hear. And when I ended up doing News at 10, Robin and I have worked very closely together, and he always says, you know, I know you don't want to do this shift, but I think you should do it because this may well lead to this. I know you're not happy about this decision, but I promise you, we're doing this strategically, so this may well lead to this. And when that phone call happened, when he asked me if I wanted to do News at 10, I know exactly where I was. I was about 6 gin and tonics deep at a leaving do in the pub. And then, gosh, a lot of my story involves alcohol and raving, but, you know, I like having fun and working. He asked me if I would do it. I got very emotional because I didn't think I was ready. I had no idea in the world I'd ever be ready until for another at least 5 or 6 years. But the thing that Robin instilled in me is belief, which I didn't have in myself. I had never asked to do News at 10 because I didn't think I was able to do it. He believed in me, and as a result, he kept pushing and pushing in a way that I didn't realise until that day in April, when April 20, whatever Claudine said, I did my first News at 10, and it's been a roller coaster ever since. I've come across a lot of sexism. I've come across a lot of racism. I've come across a lot of classism. Class is a big thing for me because having come from very much a working class immigrant family to where I am at the moment, I was lucky, and I know I was very lucky, but I see how many working class kids are dismissed almost immediately because of the way they dress, the way they talk, the way they may construct their sentences. It doesn't mean they don't have a brain, they've just been raised differently. And that's a big thing for me. When it comes to sexism in the workplace, there are a lot of programs on TV which are almost universally male-owned. A lot of most political programs involves men. So we have, and I work with a lot of the women in my industry to try and change things like that. And when it comes to racism, I mean, when I've experienced it on and off in my career, but I would say that the one defining moment was when I did my first programme when I was working in Norwich. And it was an afternoon bulletin for BBC Look East. And this woman called up onto the news desk, and no one on the news desk wanted to tell me what she said. And everyone's like, oh, no, you can't tell Charlene. I was like, no, what did she say? And no one wanted to say. Then an Asian friend of mine said, oh, God, I'll tell you what she said. Anyway, she called up to say, I do not understand why this woman's on the TV. Has the BBC run out of white presenters? I think it's disgraceful that we have people like her on the TV where English clearly isn't her first language. Oh, I think you'll find it is. And so I've had to deal with all of those things, but all those things makes me stronger, and working with mentors makes me stronger, and having a passion makes me stronger. And these are things that make you stronger. And when it comes to having the app and having mentors, I cannot continue to reiterate enough how important it actually is. Those who are currently students, one of the people that are working full-time in this room, they can be very useful to you later on down the line. That's where networking comes into play. Those guys who are currently working within your own organisations or even amongst each other, you may well find good advice. You have to continue to talk to people. You have to continue networking because whether you're male, female, if you're black, white, whatever you are, it will work immensely. Why do you think people that go to Harvard do so well? They have an old boys network because they understand the power of networking and talking and mentors. There's absolutely no reason why each and every one of you can't do that exact same thing here. So have a look at the app, see what you think, spread the word, but also get yourself mentors. That's the most important thing, I think, in anyone's career. Don't keep having a go at James. James can only take on so many mentors, I'm not saying to totally keep going for James. But honestly, think very seriously, think very intelligently about the people that you choose, because the impact that they end up having in your life will be immeasurable. Anyway, that's me. I'll now have to go back to work.